The 19th century. It was the heyday and the golden age for the Russian Empire, or at the very least, such was the vision of so-called imperial adherents of different suits. However, the majority of oppressed nations consider the empire a colossus on clay feet, and therefore Russians themselves, in the Decembrist uprising of 1825, the Poles in the November uprising of 1830 to 1831, the Belarusians and Lithuanians in the 1863 to 1864 uprising, and other nations tried to undermine this so-called prison of nations. Seeing the active involvement of Ukrainians in these uprisings, the Poles proclaimed the words "for your freedom and ours" as the slogan that would seemingly support a joint struggle. From the mid-19th century, Ukrainian intelligentsia united into legal and secret societies involved in developing ideas of how to make Ukraine autonomous and independent. In particular, this was the sole and exact purpose of the secret Cyril and Methodius Brotherhood. The most concerned Ukrainians united in the society named Romada, but as Vissarion Belinsky aptly remarked, they were infinitely distant from the people. For this reason, the people rebelled. Feeling the inner Cossack spirit, Ukrainian peasants rebelled and fought for their national rights. Fortunately, the highest officials of the Russian Empire constantly gave the rebels good reasons for this. The government scheme was simple and always the same. As soon as Russia prepared for the next war, recruiters were sent to Ukraine. They enrolled peasants as volunteers and promised them the Cossack status of a free man, lands, and a whole host of privileges. This was all before the war with Napoleon, the Crimean campaign, and all three Russian-Turkish wars. Of course, nobody wanted to fulfill these promises. Those peasants who survived after the war became serfs again, and this is exactly what triggered mass uprisings. I have such a theory that in fact over all the years that Ukraine did not have its own state, every 16 years some new generation of young people took up arms and then uprisings were organized for the liberation of Ukraine, the aim of which was the restoration of Ukrainian statehood. In the 19th century, there was a series of anti-Russian uprisings because of the fact that the Russian regime was the most totalitarian, which quite brutally oppressed the Ukrainian people socially and economically. Among them were the uprising of the Bug Cossacks of 1817, the uprising against the construction of military bases and settlements of 1819, and the Chuguyev and Shebelinka uprisings. The mass uprisings engulfed the Kiev and Chernihiv provinces in 1855, and after that the Katerinoslav, Kherson, Poltava, Chernihiv and Kharkiv provinces in 1856. The first uprising was called Kiev Cossack Dawn. The abandoning of the soldiers of the Crimean War by the imperial government sparked these uprisings. Veterans of the Crimean campaign reminded local officials of the Royal Manifesto, which provided soldiers the status of a free person, liberated them from serfdom, and granted them lands. Therefore, peasants began to prepare mass lists of free Cossacks, and they simply refused to obey the orders of their landowners. Social tensions escalated to such an extent that 8 counties of the Kiev province proclaimed their own independent Cossack republic. After several bloody clashes, the rebels were crushed, but the peasants did not want to obey, and in the next year of 1856 they began to leave with their families for Crimea. This insurgent movement is known as Interview for Free Will. There was a rumor spread at the time that the reason for the rebellion was the fact that many Crimeans died in the war, and the Tsar invited all those who desired to move to Crimea.
За це вони отримають статус козака, вільної людини, а так.
This provided them the Cossack status as a free person and their own land. This uprising failed because the imperial government eliminated its own people, who just wanted the Tsar to keep his promise.
Виконання царської обіцянки.
The internal enslaved nation policy in the Russian Empire of the second half of the 19th century was so retrograde and repressive that at the time that the revolution broke out, there was nobody to defend the Tsarist regime. Then the last Russian Tsar, Nicholas II, abdicated the throne, and it was this circumstance that radically changed the interstate relations between Russia and Ukraine that was enslaved by it.
Тому для того, щоб відновити державність України, потрібні були тільки
Appropriate decisions could have helped restore the Ukrainian state. While Tsar Nicholas II abdicated on March 3, 1917, on March 4th, the Ukrainian Central Rada, which had the aim of reviving the Ukrainian state, was established in Kiev.
Рада, яка і ставила своєю метою відновлення української державності.
Such a development of events became possible due to the fact that Ukrainian hetmans were allies of Tsars of the Romanov dynasty, but not of Moscow or the Russian state. Therefore, when the last Romanov, Nicholas II, abdicated the throne, any allied relations between Russia and Ukraine were no longer valid, so Ukrainians were again free to build their own independent state. The fact that Ukrainian leaders of 1917 to 1918 considered this shows that the revival of Ukraine's independence in those times was based on Cossack state traditions. The fact that the Ukrainian People's Republic was proclaimed in November 1917 obviously proves that it was positioned as a successor of the state of the hetmans Ivan Mazepa and Bogdan Khmelnytsky and the state of Grand Prince Volodymyr. Such a famous movement, known as Free Cossacks, during the liberation struggle used as a model the 18th century movement of the Haidamaki, who fought for state independence. They borrowed their pseudonyms, sang their songs, and took their military structure as a basis. And all this happened in the 20th century.
Військової, так би мовити, структури. І це все відбувалося уже в 20 столітті.
The first in the 20th century revival of Ukrainian state lasted for 3 years in bloody battles and endless wars, because Russian and Bolshevik governments did not want Ukraine to become independent. On November 7, 1917, the Ukrainian parliament adopted the Third Universal and proclaimed the independence of the Ukrainian People's Republic. A month later, on December 4th, the army of the Russian Bolsheviks began to occupy Kharkiv and other eastern regions of Ukraine. In January 1918, the Russian Red Army entered Kiev. The Ukrainian army, supported by allies, managed to drive the enemy away from our borders. However, in the fall of 1918, Russian Bolsheviks suddenly launched a new war against Ukraine. In the summer, Russians from the opposing camp also approached Ukraine. The army of General Anton Denikin entered Kiev on August 30th. Finally, the Bolsheviks won, and Ukrainians were deprived of the independence of their state.
Коли вони говорили про декрет о мирі, не слід забувати, що
When the Bolsheviks developed the peace decree, one must not forget that Marxist ideology required establishing a communist regime around the world. That is world domination. The issue was, is it possible to establish world domination in a peaceful manner? That suggests that the peace decree was aimed at obtaining the support of the people.
Тільки для того, щоб залучити маси на свою сторону.
However, the direct and cynical occupation of the Ukrainian state by the Russian Bolsheviks did not mean that our people stopped fighting for their independence. The Ukrainian army, supported by allies, in particular the Polish state, repeatedly organized raids on the territories captured by the enemy. This included the first and second winter campaigns and partisan resistance of field Ottomans. Their purpose was clearly defined by Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the UPR army, Simon Petlura. A rival of the Ukrainian army was supposed to wake up the people to participate in mass national uprisings against the Bolsheviks. Some people in rural regions of Ukraine actively responded to this call to action. In particular, until autumn of 1922, there was an independent Holodny Yar Republic in the Kyiv Oblast. Therefore, it's clear that the Soviet lie about the joyful and voluntary integration of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic to the USSR was nothing more than a myth. Ukrainians fought against the Soviet occupier even when it became clear that there was no longer a chance of victory.
Період окупації радянською Росією.
Occupation of Ukrainian lands by Soviet Russia had been actually a period of pure occupation until the time when the Yalta Conference was held. There, the US and Great Britain legitimized the Soviet Union as a formation in the international arena. It was only after this that the USSR could join the newly formed United Nations and could have influence on international rules and movements in the post-war period.
Які відбувалися уже після Другої світової війни.
As a result of double standards in the international policy, the entire civilized world considered the Baltic states of Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, seized by the USSR under the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, as occupied territories. However, Ukraine, which became a part of the USSR in the early 20th century, was not at the time considered an occupied territory, although the domestic, political, and international circumstances of this situation are identical. So it turns out that over 75 years of Soviet occupation within the USSR, Ukrainians became such brotherly people to Russians that to this day the latter are not ready to reconcile with their independence and are still waging war against Ukraine. And what is most important is that Russia still believes that Ukraine has never existed as an independent state. Their argument is so convincing that many Ukrainians also believed in it, and they're sure that the Ukrainian state dates back to the collapse of the USSR in 1991. Our Ukrainian state emerged in 1991 as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and while the constitution does not stipulate that it is the legal successor of the UPR and other Ukrainian state formations, it de jure remains the legal successor of the Ukrainian SSR.
За останні 27 років незалежності
Over the past 27 years of independence, previous Ukrainian governments have done very little so that Ukrainians would become aware of their political and national identity.
Саме тому ми і мали багато.
Therefore, we have those who actively supported the Russian world, so-called Novorossiya, and the transfer of Crimea to Russia in 2013 to 2014.
За передачу Росії Криму. Але за 4 роки війни проти Росії.
However, the 4-year war with Russia opened Ukrainians' eyes to both the Russian world and the independent status of the Ukrainian state.
Української держави. Але про це поговоримо.
We'll delve deeper into this matter in the next program. In the meantime, remember that every phenomenon has its pros and cons, its own pro and contra.